For 34 years, I sat at the same dinner table as these people, called them by name, shared their last name, and still felt like a ghost they could see right through. They smiled at me in public and looked past me at home. I used to think something was wrong with me. Turns out, something was very wrong with them, and a tiny tube of saliva was about to burn their whole secret to the ground. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Cassandra Wren. Most people call me Cassie. I'm 34 years old, and I live alone in a small apartment in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I teach art to middle schoolers, and I genuinely love my job. My students are loud and messy and honest in the way only 12-year-olds can be. At school, I always knew where I stood. At home, with my family, I never did. The Wrens were the kind of family that looked perfect from the outside. My mother Nora kept a clean house and brought casseroles to church functions. My older sister Delaney was the kind of woman people described as radiant. My brother Marcus could charm anyone in under 5 minutes. Together, the three of them had an energy, a current that ran between them, that I could never quite tap into no matter how many times I tried. I was always slightly outside of it. Not dramatically. Not in a way I could easily point to and say, there. That's the moment. It was quieter than that. It was the conversations that stopped when I walked into a room. The inside jokes I was never let in on. The way Nora's face would soften when she looked at Delaney, and then sort of flatten when her eyes moved to me. When my father Gerald was alive, it was bearable. He wasn't an expressive man, but he was fair. He treated all three of us the same. Then he died of a heart attack when I was 12, and something shifted in that house that never shifted back. After Gerald was gone, the gap between me and the rest of them quietly widened. I told myself families were complicated. I told myself I was too sensitive. I carried that explanation with me for over 20 years, adjusting and readjusting, always finding a way to make their behavior my fault. I had no idea how right I was that something was different about me, just not in the way I thought. Delaney was the kind of woman who made everything look effortless. She had Nora's green eyes and a smile that made people lean toward her without realizing it. At 38, she was married to Brett Calloway, a contractor who had done very well for himself. They lived in a large house on the nicer side of Bartlesville, took vacations to places that required passports, and showed up to every family gathering looking like they had just stepped out of a magazine. Nora adored her. That was simply the truth of it. Marcus was different but equally untouchable in Nora's eyes. He was 36 and had never quite settled into anything. Jobs came and went, relationships fell apart, money slipped through his fingers. But Nora always had an explanation ready. He was figuring things out. The economy was hard. He had so much potential. Whatever Marcus did or didn't do, Nora's love for him never had conditions attached. Then there was me. I don't say that to sound dramatic. I say it because it was simply how the household operated. There were 3 children in the Wren family, but the warmth was not divided 3 ways. There is a family portrait hanging in Nora's living room. It was taken when I was 19. It shows Nora, Delaney, and Marcus standing together in the backyard during what I was told was a casual photo session. I was not asked to be there that day. I found out about the photo when I saw it already framed on the wall. When I asked Nora about it, she said the photographer had a limited time slot, and she forgot to mention it. The portrait is still there. I have seen it every time I visited for the past 15 years. At Christmas, the difference in gifts was something I noticed as a teenager and kept noticing as an adult. Delaney received jewelry and weekend trips. Marcus received cash and electronics. I received gift cards and practical things, socks, lotion, a coffee mug. I told myself Nora just knew the others better. I told myself it didn't mean anything. When I graduated from college, Nora did not come. She said her knees were bad and the drive was too long. Delaney didn't come either. Marcus sent a text 3 days later. My best friend Lorraine has known me since we were in our early 20s. She has watched all of this from the outside, and for years she has said the same thing. Cassie, those people don't treat you right. I always told her she didn't understand how families worked. I was the one who didn't understand. Nora turned 65 in October. I spent 3 months making her gift, a handmade photo album, the kind you put together by hand with printed pictures and handwritten captions and little details in the margins. I drove 3 hours from Tulsa to Bartlesville on a Saturday morning with the album wrapped carefully in the passenger seat. When I arrived at Nora's house, Delaney's car was already in the driveway. I walked in to find the remnants of a dinner. Good dishes still on the table, wine glasses with dried rings at the bottom, a birthday cake mostly eaten. I stood in the doorway of the dining room and asked what I had missed. Delaney had organized a private dinner the night before. Just the close family, she said, meeting my eyes with no particular apology in them. Just something intimate. I looked at Nora. Nora looked at the table. She said, "You know how Delaney is. She just wanted it to be small." Marcus was leaning against the kitchen counter, and he made a sound that was almost a laugh. Brett was sitting in the living room with his phone, and did not look up once. I put my gift on the counter and said I was glad she had a nice evening. The party that afternoon was at a rented hall a few miles from the house. Neighbors came, church friends, a few cousins. I helped set up chairs and refill the chip bowls and smiled at people I barely knew. I was good at that, showing up, being useful, not making anything difficult. It was late in the afternoon when I went to the kitchen to throw something away. Delaney and Marcus were standing near the far counter, close together, speaking quietly. I stopped just outside the doorway because I heard my name, not spoken out loud, but I felt it somehow. I stayed still. Delaney said, "She doesn't even know, does she?" Marcus said, "And she never will if Mom has her way." That was all. They moved and the moment broke, and I stepped back before either of them saw me. I stayed another hour. I hugged Nora goodbye and told her happy birthday. I drove out of Bartlesville as the sun was going down, and I did not turn the radio on once during those 3 hours back to Tulsa. My hands stayed tight on the wheel the entire drive. For 22 years, I had been asking myself what was wrong with me. That night, for the first time, I started wondering if the question had been pointing in the wrong direction all along. I didn't sleep well for days after the drive home. The words kept coming back. "She doesn't even know, does she? And she never will if Mom has her way." I turned them over and over looking for an innocent explanation, and I couldn't find one that fit. So I started looking. I have a box in my closet that I've carried through every apartment I've lived in. It has old cards in it, some school papers, and a small stack of family photographs. I pulled it out on a Sunday afternoon and spread everything on my living room floor. I don't know why I had never really looked before. Maybe I had and just didn't let myself see it. Delaney and Marcus both have Nora's green eyes. They have Gerald's jaw too, that straight, sharp line that photographs well. They are tall and fair-skinned the way the Wren side of the family tends to be. I had looked at the two of them my entire life and accepted that families didn't always look alike. Some kids just took after a distant relative. Some kids were simply different. But looking at those photos on my floor that afternoon, I couldn't find a single feature I shared with any of them. My eyes are dark brown. My skin is olive-toned year-round. My face is shaped differently, built differently. I am several inches shorter than both Delaney and Marcus. Then I found my baby photos. Or rather, I found the near absence of them. There are no newborn pictures of me. The earliest photo I have is from when I was almost 2 months old, and even then there are only 3 or 4. Every album Nora ever put together for Delaney and Marcus started from the hospital. Mine started somewhere else, and I had never once thought to ask where. I sat with that for 2 days before I picked up the phone and called Aunt Phyllis. Phyllis is my father Gerald's older sister. She's 71 now and lives outside Little Rock. Nora never had much warmth for her, and after Gerald died the contact between them faded to almost nothing. I had her number because I was the one who remembered to call on her birthday. When I told her what I had noticed, the photos, the physical differences, she went quiet. Not the quiet of someone thinking, the quiet of someone being careful. She said, "Baby, maybe you should ask your mother some hard questions." I asked her what she meant by that. She said she had already said more than she should. She didn't need to say anything else. I heard everything she wasn't saying, and it landed in my chest like something heavy and permanent. I ordered the kit on a Tuesday night. I didn't overthink it. I just went online, put it in the cart, and paid for it before I could talk myself out of it. I sat at my kitchen table in the quiet with the TV off and made the decision the same way I made most hard decisions, alone and without ceremony. The kit arrived within the week. I followed the instructions, sealed the tube, dropped it in the mail, and then did the hardest thing I have ever done in my life. I waited. 6 to 8 weeks, the website said. During those weeks, I kept my life looking exactly the same from the outside. I drove to school. I taught my classes. I graded projects. On a weekend in November, I drove to Bartlesville and had lunch with Nora like I had done 100 times before. But I was watching now in a way I never had before. I noticed that when I mentioned being born, even casually, something in Nora's body changed. Her shoulders rose slightly. Her hands moved to her coffee cup and stayed there. She didn't panic, but she recalibrated, the way someone does when they're navigating around something they've memorized the location of. I noticed that Delaney, when I called her that month, changed the subject with a kind of practiced smoothness whenever I steered toward the past. Nothing obvious, just a redirect. A new topic dropped in at exactly the right moment. I told Lorraine everything. She listened without interrupting, which is not her natural instinct. And when I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said she was angry. Not surprised. She reminded me she had been telling me for years something was wrong, but angry. She wanted me to go to Nora directly and demand answers. She said I deserved to know the truth immediately. I wasn't ready for immediately, but I did ask. One evening I called Nora, and after a few minutes of ordinary conversation I said, "Mom, was there anything unusual about when I was born?" She answered before I had fully finished the sentence. She said I was a perfectly healthy baby, and she didn't know why I would ask something like that. The answer was smooth and complete and offered with a small note of offense, as if the question itself was strange. It was too fast, too ready. I got off the phone and sat in my apartment in the dark, and I cried. Not because I was sad, exactly. I cried because I was certain. The answer had told me everything by the way it asked nothing back. The email came on a Thursday at 7:43 in the morning. I was sitting in my car in the school parking lot with the engine still running. I saw the notification on my phone, and I just sat there for a moment before I opened it. I had submitted 2 samples. Mine, and a separate one I had collected quietly from a coffee cup Marcus left behind during a visit 2 months earlier. I had sealed it in a plastic bag and mailed it in without telling anyone. The results were clear. 0% shared DNA between my sample and his. Not a fraction. Not a trace. 0. I read it twice. Then I turned the engine off and sat in the silence of my car while the school parking lot filled up around me. Teachers walked past. A few students. Everyone moving toward the building like any ordinary Thursday. I called the school and told them I needed a substitute. Then I drove to Lorraine's house. She opened the door before I knocked, because I had texted her on the way. She took one look at my face and stepped aside to let me in. We sat at her kitchen table, and I showed her the results on my phone, and she read them without speaking. I was not falling apart. That was the thing that surprised me most about that morning. I had expected something dramatic to happen inside me when the confirmation came, some collapse or explosion. Instead, I felt very still, very clear. I told Lorraine that I already knew. I said I thought I had always known in some quiet part of myself that I couldn't access before. I said the results didn't change what I felt. They just made it impossible to explain away. We sat together for most of the morning. Lorraine made coffee and let me talk and didn't try to fill the silence when I needed it. At some point she reached across the table and put her hand over mine and didn't say anything at all. That meant more than words would have. By the afternoon something had settled in me. Not peace exactly. More like direction. The question was no longer whether I was biologically connected to the Wren family. That was answered. The question now was what they knew, how long they had known it, and what they had decided to do with that knowledge, while I spent 34 years wondering why I never felt like I belonged. I drove home that evening, and I was quiet, and I was calm, and I was finished waiting for things to happen to me. It was time to find out the truth myself. I drove to Arkansas on a Saturday. I didn't call ahead beyond telling Phyllis I was coming, and that I needed her to tell me everything she knew. She was quiet on the phone for a long moment, and then she said, "All right, baby. Come on." She met me at the door of her small house outside Little Rock. She looked older than the last time I had seen her, and her eyes were already glassy before I even stepped inside. She had made tea and set out cookies that neither of us touched. We sat across from each other in her living room, and she folded her hands in her lap and told me the truth. After Marcus was born, Gerald had a medical procedure that left him unable to have more children. Nora had struggled with that for years. She wanted a 3rd child badly enough that she eventually found a way to make it happen outside of any official system. There was a young woman, Phyllis only knew her first name, Renata, who was around 20 years old, unmarried, and in a desperate situation. An arrangement was made. Private, undocumented, and built entirely on cash and secrecy. Renata carried the baby and handed her to Nora shortly after birth in exchange for money. That baby was me. Nora told the extended family it was a quiet private adoption and asked everyone to leave it at that. Gerald agreed to go along with it. As far as anyone outside the immediate circle knew, I was simply the youngest Wren child. Then Gerald died. And something changed in Nora that Phyllis said she never fully understood. It was as though I had become a reminder of something Nora didn't want to look at anymore. The guilt, maybe, or the desperation that had driven her to that decision. Whatever it was, she turned it outward. And I was the one standing in its way. Delaney and Marcus were told the truth when they were old enough. Phyllis didn't know exactly when. She only knew that they had been told and that they had chosen not to say anything. They chose to protect Nora. They chose to keep the life they had always had. They chose each other and left me outside of it, same as always, except now they were doing it on purpose. I drove home in the dark. 5 hours with nothing but the highway and my own thoughts. I didn't cry. I had cried enough over these people already. What I felt that night was something harder and cleaner than sadness. I knew exactly what I was going to do next. The Ancestry portal had been showing me a partial match for several weeks. I had ignored it at first, too focused on everything else. When I finally clicked on it, the match was listed as a likely first cousin or close family member. Her name was Diane Castellano. I sent her a message through the portal. I kept it simple. I told her I was trying to understand my biological background and that her name had come up as a close match. I asked if she would be willing to talk. She responded within 2 days. Her message was short but not cold. She said she had a feeling something like this might come up eventually. She asked if I could tell her my birth year and the general circumstances. I told her what I knew. She called me that same evening. She told me that Renata was her older sister. She said the family had known for years that Renata had given a baby girl to a family in Oklahoma in the late 1980s. It was not something Renata talked about openly, but it was something she had never stopped carrying. Diane said her sister was now living in New Mexico. She said she would reach out to her and ask if she wanted to make contact. 3 days later, Renata messaged me herself. We arranged a video call for the following Sunday evening. I sat at my kitchen table with my phone propped against a book, and when her face appeared on the screen, she looked at me for about 2 seconds, and then she started crying. She didn't apologize immediately. She just looked at me the way you look at something you thought you had lost permanently. Then she gathered herself and she talked. She had been 20 years old. She had no money, no support, and no way to see a path forward. She made the only decision she felt she had available to her, and she had regretted it every single day since. She told me she never stopped wondering what I looked like, whether I was happy, whether I knew she had not let go easily. She said she was told I was going to a warm and stable family who would love me well. She said if she had known otherwise, she would have found a way to do things differently. I didn't tell her it was fine. I wasn't ready to say that. But I listened, and I believed her. And somewhere in the middle of that conversation, I felt something shift quietly inside me. She had my eyes. I had never seen my eyes on another person's face before that night. I agreed to meet her in person. I called Nora on a Wednesday and told her I wanted to come for dinner that weekend. I said I missed everyone and it had been too long. She sounded pleased. She said she would make pot roast. I asked if Delaney and Marcus could be there. She said she would make sure of it. I drove to Bartlesville on Saturday with 2 envelopes on the passenger seat. One contained a printed copy of the DNA results. The other contained a written account from Aunt Phyllis, 4 pages, handwritten, detailing everything she had told me in her living room in Arkansas. Phyllis had written it out willingly. She said it was the least she could do. Dinner was on the table when I arrived. Nora had cooked properly, pot roast, bread, the good dishes. Delaney and Brett were already seated. Marcus came in from the living room. Everyone settled and Nora started talking about something ordinary, and the meal began like any other. I let it go for about 2 minutes. Then I stood up quietly, took the first envelope, and placed it beside Nora's plate. I took the second envelope and placed it beside Delaney's. Then I sat back down and said, I know everything. And I want you to know that I know. The table went silent. Nora opened the envelope with unsteady hands. When she saw what it was, her face collapsed. But what came out of her was not an apology. It was tears about how difficult it had all been. How she had only been trying to protect everyone. How impossible the situation was. How hard she had worked to keep the family together. Delaney pushed the envelope away from her and told me this was not the time or the place. Her voice was controlled and cold, and she looked at me the way she always had, like I was an inconvenience she had learned to manage. Marcus stared at the table. He didn't say a single word the entire time. Brett looked at his plate. I did not raise my voice. I didn't need to. I told them I had not come for an apology because I had stopped needing one long before that evening. I told them I had found my biological mother and that she was a good person. I told them I would not be coming to holidays anymore, or answering calls out of obligation, or showing up to be the family member no one actually wanted in the room. I thanked Nora for the meal. I had not touched any of it. Then I picked up my bag and walked out the front door and did not look back once. 6 months passed. Life kept moving the way it does. I traveled to New Mexico twice to see Renata. The first trip was cautious. 2 people being careful with each other, learning the edges of something new and fragile. The second trip was easier. We cooked together in her kitchen and sat on her back porch in the evening and talked the way people talk when they are no longer strangers, but not yet sure what word to use for what they are. Renata has 2 other children, a son named Gabriel and a daughter named Sonia. They knew about me before I arrived. They had grown up knowing their mother carried something heavy, and now they understood what it was. They welcomed me without hesitation, without conditions, without making me feel like I needed to earn my place at the table. It was the first time in my life that walking into a family home felt like walking towards something instead of away from it. Back in Tulsa, my apartment looks different now. I printed photographs from both New Mexico trips and put them on the wall above my desk. People who look like me, smiling like they mean it. I walk past them every morning and still feel something quiet and solid settle in my chest. Lorraine threw me a dinner at her house a few weeks after my second trip. She called it a found family dinner. She made too much food and invited a handful of people who have shown up for me over the years in the ways that matter. It was loud and warm and nobody made me feel like a guest. Aunt Phyllis sent flowers with a card that just said she was proud of me. I put the card on my refrigerator. Nora has called several times. I have not answered. Delaney sent a letter. 2 pages that spent most of their length explaining the situation rather than acknowledging what it had done to me. I read it once, folded it along its original creases, and put it in a drawer in my bedroom. I have not opened that drawer since. I want to be clear about something. What I did was not about burning anything down. I did not go to that dinner looking for destruction. I went looking for the end of a performance I had been giving my entire life. The performance of being grateful for a place at a table where I was never truly welcome. They didn't treat me like a stranger because of who I was. They treated me like a stranger because of what they knew, and what they were too cowardly to say. The DNA didn't change my story. It just finally gave me permission to write my own.